Welcome to Security in the Fast Lane, a monthly conversation on improving security outcomes, creating a culture of security, and building subject matter expertise. Brought to you by NTT Application Security with your host, Setu Kulkarni. Joining him today is James Robinson, Deputy CISO and Director at Netskope.
For the last 5 years or so, I've been closely observing the state of application security, and I've been writing about it through the yearly statistics report we release. The headline is that the state of application security is not improving. There are more applications than ever before, released at a volume and pace that is faster than ever before, and in an environment that is becoming more adversarial than ever before. Now, why hasn't the state of application security improved? In NTT's latest yearly Global Threat Intelligence report, they find that in 2020 alone, that the application-specific attacks on applications dominated every industry. The Verizon Data Breach Investigation Report, the DBIR, tells a similar story. Basic web application attacks are the second most popular breach pattern. Now let me try to do some first principles thinking here out aloud. I can see that there is at least one area where we've fallen short as a software community. We have failed to draw a line between the security of products running in production with the product requirements that shape those very products in the first place. I think we've done a decent job, though, of testing products running in production for security issues. But my argument is that we have grossly overlooked the cause and effect relationship between product requirements and the final product when it comes to security. With that backdrop, I reached out to my friends at Netskope, where their Deputy CISO, James Robinson, has done a tremendous amount of work to bring product management into the security fold. James, welcome to Security in the Fast Lane. Before we get going here, I wanted to hear a bit more about how you got to where you are. What are some of the inflection points in your career and some of the interesting choice points you've had to make throughout your career?
Thanks for having me. It's definitely a fun topic. When my boss Lamont introduced us, it was kind of one of those things that I remember back in my career multiple points where my relations with product management was strained. Other times it was really good, and kind of had to think through those different things. So happy to be here, and thanks again. My days kind of started off in networking, actually. When I was in high school, got an opportunity to start at State Farm Insurance, doing computer networking. It was still the days when networking was really big. And kind of funny, one of my interviews, I was actually looking at joining Cisco and working for Level 3 Communications. And one of my interviews, I met with actually security leader who came from AT&T, who was working for Level 3 and Cisco. He was on the account as well. And he said, yeah, we have a big red button that you can still push. He might have been messing with me. I don't know. But at that point, he said that the number one thing is think paranoid. And that was kind of one of my first points of cybersecurity was, that learning of thinking paranoid. And obviously in my career, I've probably taken it too far a couple of times, but it still is something that I think back and I try to educate others on. Kind of roll forward, how did I get out of networking? I got an opportunity at State Farm to actually move into the security organization. And during my interview, that was one of the things I went back on. You got to think paranoid. You got to start paranoid and work from there. And then I was actually able to join the security team and then quickly moved over to the red team. At that point, it was very early on. It was a vulnerability assessment pen testing team. It was well before, this was early 2000s, and helped to build up that actual team and group there. Then I went to Anheuser-Busch. The kind of major inflection point when I went to Anheuser-Busch was that move to focusing more on kind of product and business flows. At State Farm, obviously, large insurance company, very large program. Even today, it'd be a very large program. But at Anheuser-Busch, we were a small, nimble program that had a lot of different, basically, hooks into a lot of groups, and also got involved in more product and really got me involved in some of the DCS space, distributed control systems and control system space, as I partnered up with our brewery operations teams. And did more security type of functions there. Also was doing more red teaming, more hacking, things like that for that group. Anheuser-Busch got bought, many know. And when they got bought, I went to, the economy was dropping out at that point in the mid 2000s. So I said, where do I go? Safe place to go was oil at that time. So I went to Emerson. Emerson was one of the growing and largest companies in St. Louis at that time. And I went over to Emerson Electric. Did a lot of internal security work there, but I always had this nag to get back to the business side of things. And I pitched the idea to the CISO at that point. Jason Clark pitched the idea to him that I think that we should be including more security in the products and either have a service that we deliver to the products and the product teams, or start to do assessments on the products that we're releasing. And he pitched the idea in joint with him to the CTO, and then from there, they actually thought it was better for me to move into one of the business units and get my hands dirty. I also had a couple of exploits that I developed at that point, which were kind of fun to show the teams how to take out data centers and do things like that, and work through those conversations, as the infrastructure we were putting together and building was really focused on data center management and power and air conditioning the data centers. And I took that into kind of this new field, this new area of product security. There wasn't a lot of written or documented product security programs or anything. I really had to join and build connections with folks at Cisco and Oracle. Look at Microsoft's program. There really wasn't a lot of programs that were existent at that point for product security. And that taught me a lot. I also at that point learned a lot about product managers and working with product management. And that was the first time that I actually had even known what product management was. I never even knew what it was until I was actually in a product team. And at that point, I started working with the product managers about how do we include security into the products we're making, and what does that actually mean? And I remember always being told, well, security, yeah, that's one of those ilities, or security is one of those non-functionals. Non-functional, we're building critical infrastructure and such. It's not a non-functional. This is definitely functional. Take authentication off of something today, you don't have a product, right? That's a functional piece of what we do and everything that we build today. But at that point, it was still really looked at from that perspective. Roll forward, left there, went over to WebSense for a little bit of time, did product security strategy as well as internal security work there. Then went to Optiv, kept on doing things. And at Optiv, one of the roles that I actually took on was third-party risk management. We made an acquisition in a company, brought the technology over, built the development team, and I ran product. And I also was the security officer for the business unit. And that was my first time where I actually became like the understanding of what is product management with security at the same time. And it was kind of easy to apply because we were still building security product, but there was times where you had to make that decision. Do we, address the flaw? Do we push the flaw because it's within the window, or, address another bug, or do we go for the feature? And that was very difficult to even make, as a product manager, very difficult sometimes for the engineers to understand and get that. And then, after there, came here to Netskope as deputy CISO. Internally, I focus on our engineering relationship as part of the CISO's office, focus on the engineering relationship, the product security relationship, and then cut across the different teams, really focused on application security assurances. What does that mean? My goal is at the end of the day, when we have a release or feature and the CISO Lamont asks the question, are we ready to release? It's very clear, very easy. I can say, yes, we're ready to release, give the thumbs up and go. So it's really why I look at it as an assurance program and make it cross-cutting across the board. So that's a little bit in my background. And again, love this topic. Thanks for having me.
No, perfect. And I take it WebSense was where you met Lamont. Is that fair?
Yeah, I actually worked for Lamont there as well. So that's where I met Lamont. And at that point, he and I started to do some things kind of on the innovation space together. I reported to him. I guess if kind of whoever's listening to this, if you're ever looking for a deputy CISO to come in to hire you as the CISO, I always find myself in a position where I'm hiring my boss. So if I go somewhere maybe be looking to see who I'm going to hire for my boss. But yeah, that's where I met Lamont. Was part of that interview process and all for him. Same thing happened at Optiv. Hired my boss, Jonathan Troll there. So it's kind of the role I always find myself in.
Yeah, small world. Look, let's kind of kick things off here. So as you were kind of walking through your career and the various right and left turns you made, I picked up on a few strands. And one of the things that stood out to me was the fact that you've been a pretty forward-leaning CISO. At least that's the impression I get. And there's a concept that I've been working out in my head, and the concept is called CISO 2.0. And the basic expectation of a CISO 2.0 is that they're able to translate back and forth between business risks and technical requirements, right? And in this case, the examples that you used around, look, when I have to talk to a product management individual, I have to tell them if you remove authentication, it's not a product anymore. So those kinds of conversations. So I want to argue that maybe, just maybe, that we are creating a wrong or unreasonable expectation of a CISO 2.0 by making them responsible for product requirements around security. After all, for everything else related to product, we expect the product manager to translate back and forth between business and technical requirements. Now, I'd like to get your opinion. Do you see the issue in a similar light?
I think today we're starting to see it more and more. I think kind of internal. One of the things we talk about is the different types of CISOs as well. And when we think about the different types of CISOs, you think of the deep technical CISOs. You think of CISOs who are compliance oriented CISOs. You think of CISOs who are business leaders, and then CISOs who are risk leaders. And I think the business leader and risk leader CISOs are definitely where the industry is migrating towards. I would break them up a little bit different. The risk CISO is almost moving down the path of a chief risk officer type of role, and broadening it out, beyond cyber. In many cases, there's legislation and regulatory risk and things like that. Working a lot with chief counsel and privacy and such. And then you also have the business leader CISO, and the business leader CISO is, I would say, even more so almost focused on the opportunity and understands, what is the business, what is the product that you're making, and how are you making that product, and what are the associated risks with it. Now, the interesting thing is, the growth of cyber is no secret. And I used to hate the word cyber, but now it's much easier to say cyber instead of information security or any of those others. And because of that growth, if it almost is now at the point, if the CISO is not doing it, who is? And if you want to even equate it back to other areas, at the end of the day, right, for the numbers and the finances and stuff like that, the CFO is the one who is held accountable to it. Now, if salespeople are putting in junk data into the pipeline and the forecasts, then junk data is what the CFO is going to have. But it's up to the CFO to get that cleaned up and to work with the other leaders. And I think that's where we're really starting to see that you're going to have one person, even if you take it to a committee, there has to be one group who would be responsible for all things cyber. And because we're seeing this transformation, right, as many of us talk about the business transformation and data transformations and all those other pieces, but as you really see that happen, the product teams, they could definitely take a stake in it. But many times product teams don't also have say in quality. It's the overall organization, or it's the head of engineering that sometimes will take on the quality initiatives and say, yes, to the product team, I'm giving you the product you asked for, but for the quality of that, I'm giving you back this. But at the same time, I think that, for organizations where the CISO hasn't moved into that, I think the product team is the right place to do that. And I think that they should actually, they have an opportunity to really step into that and lean forward and say, for security within the product, here's who's going to own that. I think at the end of the day, we sometimes will say, who's going to be the one who's going to be called in front of the committee or in front of the executive teams when something breaks, and whoever that is going to be would be the one who is actually going to have to be responsible for it. And I think, in today's day, it's always going to be the CISO. No matter if it's a product engineering team or if it's a infrastructure team or a sales team or whatever, it is always going to come back to the CISO in today's day.
Let's pull on that strand a little bit. I think there's a lot to unpack there. Let me start with the last statement that you made around who's going to be called in front of the committee. And I get it. The CISO is the person who's representing security. The CISO gets in front of the committee and they do kind of commission a root cause analysis. You do the root cause analysis, you find maybe a bug in the product, a security bug in the product. Right. So I'm totally down with the idea of the CISO being the person who's ultimately accountable for the security of the product. But I want to pull on the strand where ultimately, when it comes to the product manager is the gatekeeper, the person who's making the trade-offs between implementing a feature versus implementing something in security. So I'm trying to explore the idea of moving that security needle at least somewhere in the middle between the CISO and the product manager from a requirements perspective.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. So I think that and we can break this down and double clicking into it or pulling on that thread a little bit more. So if you this is how I look at it. If you look at what are the requirements going into the product, and this is where you get into those functional requirements, which, I'm a security professional, so it's a little bit easier for me to untangle, and not looking at it just from a product management side. From that view or that perspective, the product manager should know what are clear requirements. Now, I've seen requirements in the past where, the security requirements are, uphold the security that's already in place. Well, what does that actually mean, right? If you're writing a new feature, what does that actually mean, right? That's a poorly written requirement. And I still think, across the board, there's a lot of opportunities that we have to write better requirements, and not make them so loose or so undefined, which is one of the problems that we get into when security is the one who actually writes the requirements, or the CISO writes the requirements. You end up writing requirements that are so undefined or so loose that developers get frustrated and product management gets frustrated because they don't know how to how to implement that said thing. And then I think you get onto the other side where if it always just becomes something within product management, then you would, there's definitely some education. I know one of the things that you talked about that we'll go over today is, potentially some education and some tracks and some things that product management can do to take a step forward into this, and to, not loosen the load, but to take on some of the load of what is a security requirement. How do you write a security requirement? In the form of a story or in the form of a use case, or I like to look at them as as taught about alternative flows. What's an alternative flow to a use case that you already have, and how do you put into an alternative flow something that shouldn't be done, and how do you clearly outline the things that shouldn't be happening?
Absolutely, and we'll kind of double click into the use cases conversation in a minute. But just to kind of close out this particular topic, would you then support the inclusion of some basic cybersecurity knowledge for a product manager today? Considering that most products today are software as a service, most products today are designed to be online and available over the internet, would you then support if I were to say, look, let's go back to the basic product management job description and add some basic amount of security knowledge to that job description? Would you support that?
I've 100%, not just support, encourage, and try. That's exactly the approach and what we do internally. Here is that. So, product managers are expected to know, the security requirements. There is expectation that requirements will be reviewed. We've even gone as far as having some cheat sheet requirements. Honestly, and checklists, work aids, those types of things. We're all busy. We're all, going, if I'd say 1,000 miles a minute, I feel like sometimes it's faster than that. If you look how fast the emails are going across the U.S. and the world, right? that's going faster and faster and faster. And so, any of those items are very helpful. I think that even reviews and review sessions of through the SDLC cycles and stuff. We have some easy ones. So if there's even things that are no additional security requirements are needed, well, then have an easy call out that says security reviews in accordance with SDLC should still be applied. Like that's an easy catch-all requirement that a product manager can use inside of our organization to ensure that when it's picked up by those in engineering, they can look at it and start to say, yes, let's go down this path.
Yeah.
Let's make sure that at least we reach out and ask the security team, or I can ask team leads, or I can ask for security reviews, those types of things. So we support it in even those easy ways to make it something that's just an easy call out.
One of the things that, if you're cool with this, I'd like to do is after we record this podcast sometime in the near future, sit down with you and basically extract those 5, 10, 15 different things that you do or enforce within product management in your organization and see if we can bring out like a blog post or a white paper that people can start using in the job descriptions that they post for product managers, if that sounds like a good idea.
Yeah, that'd be good, because I feel like in some cases I'm seeing product managers now. You see security product managers that are coming to the forefront, and I don't know. I get concerned about that, because sometimes I feel like each product manager that's hired should have the responsibility of security, not one on the team of product management. And I'm starting to see that happen, and that's concerning.
All right, let's kind of move on. I think that's a great takeaway. Let's kind of work on that task after the podcast. I'm excited to partner with you on that. Let's move to another kind of strand around use cases that you brought up. Today, if I used to be a product manager, I did product management for almost 10, 12, 15 years of my life now. PMs usually define use cases and, for the most part, consider their job done as far as product requirements are concerned. Obviously, they do a lot more, but broad strokes, they work on use cases. Now, in my last episode, I met with Matt McClarty from MuleSoft, and we discussed what he calls the 3 ways of the API. And one of the ways he points out is called the outside in way, meaning start working from customer requirements backwards when developing APIs. Now, one of the conclusions that we drove was that developers need to be very intentional about the APIs that they're going to write, now that APIs are everywhere. And what that really means for our conversation today is that product managers need to be very intentional about the use cases for all aspects of the product. I want to explore the idea of expanding that responsibility of PMs to also define abuse cases, or, like you said, alternative workflows. Now, what's the best way to kickstart this movement? If I were a product manager and I was listening to this podcast, and I'm so moved by this podcast and I want to start implementing those abuse cases, how do we start that movement? Do we start by going to the CISO team and asking them to provide subject matter expertise until the organization develops or hires PMs with security expertise? What's a good starting point?
So, can't speak from the product management side directly, but I can speak to what I've done to enable product managers, which maybe we can get to the answer. So what I've done in the past to enable product managers, started this at Emerson, was let me build the personas of the attackers or hackers or even abusers of the system. Many times, system changes can be made by an administrator that then take down the system or break it or cause it to have over processing. Or they hit, maybe even an abuser would hit an API, and they hit the API so fast, or they make a query for such a data load that it takes the system down or causes impact to the rest. And we've started to see where gateways, API gateways, and throttling and things like that have come in. But it goes back to one of the things I shared earlier, thinking malicious or thinking suspicious even. I think that's a good place to start. When I started to develop the personas that actually could be used, I later found this was actually I first started to create a couple of personas. It was like the abuser and the hacker, which probably weren't the best, but it was the abuser and the hacker personas. And then I started to work through basically how would these two personas look at any use case, and then take that use case and do what they want to do to it. How would they abuse it? How would they hack it? How would they try to hack it and do those types of things? And so that's how we started it off that way. Later, I found, and I still need to find it. I really don't know where it's at or where it went to. But later, I found this really good piece of material that was put together by Intel when Malcolm Harkins was there. That really started to outline more than just those two personas that I came up with. It can outline nation state actors and competitors and people who are just trying to take information off my website and resell it, and cybercrime actors, various groups and states, which I think for product managers, that's almost like the next level. First, if you maybe start with something simple, the abuser, which would be like an administrator, someone who has access, but they abuse it. They do things that are incorrect. And then you also take the actual malicious user or hacker. From those two perspectives, you can start to flush out how to make a more defensible system, or how to even look at your use cases and make them more robust, and make it clearer for the engineers what they actually need to scope out, what they need to develop. You can start to think very quickly, and we've been fortunate enough that we've been educated over the last couple of years. You can start to think of various abuses, even that you may have done yourself within a system that you don't want to see anymore. The API one is a good example that you brought up, which is the alternative to that would be someone makes too many queries, or they what happens when you have a power user? Can you actually support a power user and have them actually make the queries on a different system? What happens when you hit the thresholds? And what are those thresholds if they need to be defined? And even through that conversation, a lot of times it will flush out maybe some other requirements, or at least some knowns. A lot of times you just even want to know, what are your knowns? If you know you have a threshold, it's going to be 1 meg for a file, let's just say, so super small today, but it's 1 meg. Well, if you know that that's your threshold, then you can at least protect that threshold, and you can watch to see when you're hitting that threshold. And it also makes it better for your SRE or for your other teams to watch for that threshold being hit. So then, now that you can take that back in, and that's another feature to increase your threshold to 10 meg or 20 meg or 100 meg or whatever that might be. So you can actually set that, and it's good to have that as a known parameter and actually flesh that out, as a requirement into the engineering teams.
I like that, right? I like the idea of taking a persona-based approach, abusers and hackers. I think product managers those concepts are native to product management. Now, the next level of question I have for you is, yes, I'm a product manager. I now know that there are two personas that I need to account for as I build out requirements, the abuser and the hackers. But still, product managers or contemporary product managers really don't know what the hacker mindset is, right? What the abuser mindset is. So how does a product manager who has some basic security knowledge, who understands the difference between abusers and hackers, then go about gathering those requirements? Who does that product manager talk to? Do they conduct a workshop? How do they pull the right subject matter experts in around the abuse and hacker kind of requirements?
Yep. So I think there's a couple different pieces, or a couple different areas they can go down. So one of them would be, if you have the experience, you could start to break down those functional, non-functional requirements and break those down that way. So that you're always going to require certain things like authentication, always going to require authorization. In my opinion, those are very functional. You're always, going to need to be producing logs, very, very functional requirements that any platform and product should support. And then you have kind of the other side, which are those unfunctional or non-functionals, those things that you don't know. It's that mindset kind of area. I remember working with one pen tester really early in my career. And I said, well, why did you do that? And he said, because I could. Right? Like there was no boundary to it. It was basically your own mind was your own boundary. Why did you decide to take a sledgehammer to it? Because I did. I knew it would be broken, right? And in many cases, that's kind of, you have to pull on that and you have to understand it. Now, if you're challenging yourself or it's hard to get there, sometimes your engineering teams have that knowledge as well. You can pull from abuses from previous systems and previous areas and have those as catalogs. And if let's say you're with a newer organization or you don't have that skill set, you can definitely reach into your own security team. They can bring you that. I've even had members of my team that they love doing this stuff. Say, to the audience, think about your day and your life going in as someone in cybersecurity, where the unfortunate reality of it is no matter what, there's doom at the end, right? Like that's almost how I approach of my job now, right? Like, as much I could do a billion things, but one wrong thing is going to be basically the end of all good things that I've done. And then I have to I have to pivot, or I have to start rebuilding. So reach into your security team, because one thing I've found is I've enabled my security teams to be part of and work with the product management teams, even folks that are on, surprisingly, a governance, risk, and compliance team. Those folks can bring a malicious mindset because they live it as well. They read it, they understand it when they see it in the news. And while you may not want to have the GRC orientation of some of the requirements that come across, because they could be like, very lofty or must meet this compliance objective, something like that. You can go through it a few times and get them to start thinking malicious. And as they start to think malicious, which is, I think, the main thing, right? Think malicious, think suspicious. If you can start to do that and start to have that conversation, then you can start to go down this path. The other one, reach out to consulting parties. I used to call them paper pen tests. Essentially, and we do it internally. It's write up all the abuse cases as you're looking at a feature set. There may be some basic ones in there. Let's expand on that. Let's come up with all the abuses. At the end of the day, I would love it for my red team to come up with 24 abuses that the product management team never thought of. We give them to product management or work with the engineering team very early on, and they fix those abuses before they get released. And so when I go to do the test and verify those abuses or even expand on those abuses, the system is robust and it's there, and it's actually built with that in mind. That's another way to actually approach it. You can use consulting firms. You can dive even into some of the threat modeling. But generically, I call it paper pen tests. And that's an easy way to approach it as well.
Yeah, I'm going to borrow that, actually, paper pen test. I like that idea a lot. Now, isn't there one more kind of element to this, maybe more tactical? I know you've done some work around the cheat sheets on OWASP, and I actually have it open in front of me. I quite like the simplicity of the abuse case. The abuse case for a feature which allows uploading of a file is upload the file which is malicious, it has a macro in it, and can drop a malware. That's kind of the abuse case. You've got a feature that allows the uploading of a file. The abuse case is, or at least the paper pen test is, I'm going to upload a file that has a malicious macro in it. Now, talk to us a little bit about the cheat sheets that you've contributed to and you've looked at on the OWASP organization.
Yeah. So the one that myself and a member of my team, Deepak, that we came up with was, I wrote the requirement in very early on when I joined here. It was one of those, hey, give us requirements really quick for this. So I said, requirement for this feature is thou shalt not be vulnerable to any of the OWASP top 10. And the product manager, I was kind of being snarky about it, but the product manager came back and said, thank you. Now what does that mean? I said, well, do you know what the OWASP top 10 is? He said, yeah, I know what it is. I said, well, then make sure that the product's not vulnerable to it. That's all I'm asking you to do. And they said, yeah, that's not clear enough. That's not going to meet, I need use cases and stuff. And I said, oh, okay, gotcha. And I realized that there was no real reference that was available. So I reached back to a couple of my other colleagues, and we started to expand on this idea that you can actually take the OWASP top 10, and those can be your epics. Each item of the OWASP top 10 can be an epic, and then with that epic, you could actually come up with abuse cases that apply to it. So you can have an epic for injection, and then have the various abuse cases for injection as the actor of a malicious user. And it's a very easy way that you can actually use that to go back and say, okay, let me look at my use case. The product manager can say, let me look at the use case. Okay, let me understand, because I understand the terminology of use case, abuse case, and those types of things. Let me try to apply this, as an abstract almost, in some cases. Let me apply it now to mine. So that was the idea of where that came from, and what really that was about was, let me make it into an abuse case orientation, or a use case orientation that has abuse behind it. They can actually be easily basically pulled off of the website, on the OWASP website, and put that in. That was the idea, and actually happy that you had it and read through it. It's gotten a lot of good traction. I think it actually got published through the Bangalore OWASP community, back into the larger community set, which is where Deepak on my team works from. And it was fun, kind of a fun piece of work as well.
No, actually, I found it quite useful. It's very readable and easy to understand. A nice segue into one of the last topics I want to talk to you about. What's kind of the basic skill ladder, if I may, that a PM or the PM community needs to climb? Obviously, I could say that the first thing every PM should do is go read up about OWASP Top 10. And once they've read about the OWASP Top 10, go read the cheat sheet and very quickly understand what the abuse cases could be. So that's clearly a simple, easy, tactical takeaway. But beyond that, just off the top of your head, a few things that the PM community and PMs listening to this podcast can start doing, small habits, or like the famous book calls this, atomic habits that PMs can make or include in their day-to-day to become more security aware.
I'd say the first, if you haven't created the abuser and the malicious hacker, that type of thing, if you haven't created a persona for them, explore it. Right, that's going to be a really, really good thing for them to do, and you can start to think about just even seeing those two, you can start to look at your use case and understand how would it be abused. Start to look at abuses towards whatever product or system you're building. Look at abuses that may be impacting others, or abuses on existing product that may apply to that. That's another good one. We label our abuses internally, and anytime there is one that's found, take that back into our ticket system. And we label it very clearly so it can actually be used, and then start to create that taxonomy that can be pulled from, again and again. That's another easy thing to do. The other one that I would say to research, and I haven't tracked the group in a long time, but the one I would say was usable security. That was kind of an eye-opening scenario for me. And usable security was actually created by Carnegie Mellon University, the CMU SEI group. They actually came up with this notion. They used to have classes in it. I don't know if they still do, but the idea of how do you build security into your product and make it usable, which I think is a challenge of many things that we build today. So do you have a scenario where it just pops up a big red X and says fail, stop, or do you show logs whenever there is an error or an issue? Things like that. There's better and more usable ways, and they give examples of those. And it's actually really good work that was actually put together. Lori Craner, our Dr. Lori Craner, was one of the ones that I talked to very early on with that group. And I think a product manager that starts to get into usable security and those concepts, I think will really be able to gravitate and pick up a lot of items because of the way that they approach speaking about security in general, everything from the little lock that we have in our URLs and browsers, to pop-ups of errors and those types of things. And it gives you another perspective as well. That would be another one. There's a lot of good written work, and they're always looking for other resources to really hook into. I can share the link to the CMU group that they actually have, but they produced a lot of really good work over the years.
That's great. Actually, the book I was referring to, Atomic Habits by James Clear, another James, really talks about this idea of building tiny, repeatable habits. And I think you've outlined 4 of them really well, right? OWASP Top 10, the cheat sheets, understand the abuser and hacker persona. Actually, I did an episode with the founder of Bugcrowd talking about the hacker mindset, which was quite an eye-opening conversation for me. It's just understanding what the hacker mindset is, what the abuser mindset is. I think third thing you spoke about was slowly but surely building out a dictionary or a taxonomy or a repository of abuses and hacks that your product has been subject to, and listing them out in your ticketing system or in some document that can be used and reused. And I really like this idea of about usable security. The term itself lends itself to a product manager liking it. It's all about usability and the intersection of usability and security. So I'll make sure that all of those topics and links are captured in the show notes as well.
Thank you.
James, this has been an awesome conversation. I'm sure security folks who listen to this conversation and product management folks who get interested with the title and listen to this will get a lot out of this. In my mind, this is a complex and a consequential issue, bridging the gap between the product requirements from a security point of view and the security of products that are running in production. We've got to bridge that gap, and the better we do it, the better our security is going to be. Thank you so much for taking the time, James.
Thank you. Anytime.
All right. With that said, folks, finally a quick but important shout out to the producers of the podcast who make this an absolute joy to do. Thank you, Herman and Lauren.
Thank you for listening to Security in the Fast Lane, brought to you by NTT Application Security. To learn more, visit us on the web at www.whitehatsec.com.